Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. Intergalactic Athletic Contest, written by Jayhawk Films. Hello and welcome, viewers, to the 80th Intergalactic Athletic Contest. We are so happy to have you viewing and hearing us throughout the galaxy, as we bring you what is turning out to be an incredible display of athletics. My name is Idlaka of Mylak, and I am the primary host of today's festivities. With me is my esteemed colleague, Relo of Pachio 5, who is aching to talk about the upcoming games.
That is right, Idlaka. In this cycle's contest, we have brand new species joining the contest. The species known as humans, from their home planet of Earth. Now, as some of you may be aware, each contest is to show the best athletic prowess of each species. Some contests, like the distance contest, are always won by their associated species. But within each contest, each species is trying the best of the previous record set by their predecessors. If one species outdoes the previous record holder, it'll be adjusted accordingly to the Galactic Senate's scientific archives. And this year will be interesting. Humans so far haven't been documented yet in athletics against other species, so this will show us exactly what they can do. Now, with all of that out of the way, let us get into the action with our first contest, the distance contest.
This was by no means Gyron's first contest on his home planet. He had participated in hundreds of them, all in preparation for this moment. He was the best Tulwekian in distance, and for the past 79 contests, this was what his species dominated at. His back legs were the mass of muscle ready to propel him forward, and his arms were able to make quick adjustments if needed. His tail wagged slightly behind him as he waited to be called up to the starting position, as if it knew it was time to start working. Gyron decided to quickly stretch while waiting for the starting auditorium, and bent forward as he briefly went quadrupedal, arcing his back. He preferred his natural stance, unlike the rest of his kind, who deemed it only necessary for running. Sure, the Tulwekian's body could stay bipedal forever, but that didn't mean they needed to. As far as Gyron was concerned, nature was nature, and if they had evolved to be both, then he should do as nature had intended. Suddenly, Gyron heard a sound of footsteps approach him, and he turned his head to see the Malakian slowly shuffling his way. They were the second best distant species in the galaxy, and that was only because instead of running like the rest, they hopped with their massive back limbs. Gyron stood up to meet his eyes as it approached. "Greetings."
Greetings. You must be Gyron, right?
"I am Frojak." The Malakian bowed its head, as was customary, and Gyron followed suit.
I assume that you heard about the news.
About the humans, Gyron couldn't help but let out a low growl, his species' version of a chuckle. "Yeah, I don't really know what to make of them. I don't think that they're going to be much of competition. How are you going to be able to run fast with all those small legs?" Frojak chittered his teeth, laughing.
Seriously, I kind of want to slow down just enough to see when it stops moving. So, pretty soon after the starting whistle.
Suddenly, the sound of a horn came over the speakers, signifying the athletes to get into position. All 100 species lined up to exit the auditorium, with Gyron and Frojak at the front, showing their first and second species rank. The doors in front of them opened, and the sound of cheers and roars entered the room as the athletes slowly walked into the stadium. The bright light of the day momentarily blinded Gyron, and as his eyes adjusted, he saw the open plain in front of them, with the starting line clearly marked for each species to begin. Gyron led the procession with confidence, and as he looked to the stands, he saw his species roaring the loudest, waving his planet's flag as it held up a right paw in a sign of unity. He saw other species in the stadium, but altogether, his species easily outnumbered all of them. At least, until he saw the humans. His species was certainly larger than them, but they somehow took up the same area of the stadium as his, and were almost as loud. For a moment, he was almost put off by it, but he knew that they could never beat his species in this event. Each one of them would go home with sore throats and the knowledge that they were hardly equal to the Telwekians. As Gyron approached his place, he looked to the left and saw that the humans would be competing right next to him. Good, he thought. I get a chance to put this one in their place myself. As he waited for the rest of the species to get into place, he leaned over to Frojak to his right. Want to make a fun deal? Frojak perked up his ears. I'm listening. However far the human gets, that's how much Illurian ale we have to drink tonight. Frojak chittered his teeth again in laughter. That doesn't sound like much to me, but sure, deal. Just as they bowed their heads in acknowledgement, the human walked up to its place next to Gyron. Now this one certainly can't be their best, Gyron thought, looking at the creature. It was pretty thin with barely any fur on it, except for on its head. And while its legs certainly looked bulky proportionally, it didn't have the tail to correct its course if needed to change direction. Gyron almost kept staring until the human looked up at him and whistled. You're a big fella, aren't you? It said. The Gyron tweaked its head, unsure as to what the fella meant. Did his internal translator malfunction? I am no Farah, he tried to say, but his tongue couldn't find the right place in his mouth. I am Gyron of Tolwek. The human's face briefly went red and scratched the back of his head. Its long, brown fur was held back by some fabric, and for a moment, Gyron thought that it was some sort of blue fur. Oh yes, the info reels on humans mentioned some dyed their hair for aesthetic purposes. Strange. Sorry, I'm a little new to this whole thing. I'm Judy. It's a pleasure to meet you, Gyron. I hope that we can have a good race. It bared its teeth towards Gyron, and for a moment Gyron wasn't sure whether it was a show of happiness like he had learned, or a sign of dominance. His thought process was broken as the announcer came over the speakers. Attention athletes, as a reminder, this contest is purely about endurance. At the sound of the whistle, you are to commence running for as long as you can. There is no time limit, and wherever you stop moving will be marked as your species distance. Now, athletes, take a mark. Gyron bent down and entered what he liked to call the pounce position. He looked to his right and saw Frojak in an odd pose, but Gyron knew that it was key for the Manics to get a good start. Gyron looked to his left momentarily to see what the human would be in, and was surprised to see that it had entered an almost quadrupedal stance like himself. Are they actually quadrupeds? He thought. But he snapped himself out of it and focused on the field ahead. He almost wanted to wait just to see how the human ran, but he knew that any sign of delay would be taken as a sign of weakness from his fellow Talwekians. He waited patiently for the starting command. The whistle went off. Gyron bounded forward, and within seconds he had already left his fellow competitors behind. Frojak may be second best, but Talwekians were nothing if not fast. And Gyron was the fastest of them all. The landscape raced by him as time seemed to slow down and speed up simultaneously. And by the time his muscles were sending him the message to slow down, the sound of the stadium was already a distant memory. He panted, trying his best to regulate his body temperature, knowing the previous record of 40 kilometers would be eliminated ahead of him in time. Finally, he saw the hologram light up in the distance and forced his muscles into overdrive, until finally he burst through the hologram in a blaze of fur and thunder. He kept running for a few more strides before finally coming to a stop. He lay down in the grass to help cool himself off. An automated drone soon hovered above his head and sprayed mist of cold water over him. Congratulations, Gyron, on setting a new record of 43 kilometers, it said, planting a small flag next to him. 43, he thought. Beat that, human. He chuckled in his now low growl for moments as he slowly got up and looked back, wondering where Frojak was at this point. The furthest the Malakian had ever gotten was 3 kilometers, so Gyron doubted that he would see any competitors from here on out. However, it was a matter of sportsmanship to wait until all species were stopped before Gyron was picked up, and that usually took a good couple of hours, so he decided to lay back down until the drone signaled that it was time to leave. And so, Gyron waited. And waited. And waited. Eventually, Gyron started to get annoyed. It normally never took this long for all the competitors to finish. Was this drone broken? Or maybe it was a signal at the end, and Gyron had just missed it. He stood up to check the drone, but the sound of shuffling fabric perked up his ears. Gyron turned his head, and what he saw almost knocked him back down. Running up to him was the human. Sure, it wasn't running fast, but it also didn't seem to be tired at all. It wasn't even breathing that badly. Just a steady rhythm that matched its pace. Gyron couldn't help but stare wide-eyed as it ran up to him, smiled as if everything was fine, waved one of its appendages at him, and then continued running, having never slowed down. Gyron quickly looked up at the drone. "Drone, how long has it been since the start of the contest?" 6 hours and 15 minutes. 6 hours? Gyron looked back at Judy, the human, as she slowly faded into the distance. "I hope they stop soon." Gru steadied itself next to the wall as it watched the contest in front of it. It didn't feel worried as the Telwakian walked up to the pitch and prepared to throw a small sphere. The sphere throw was a Jeknalian specialty, and Gru was one of the best. Sure, it had placed second in the finals back on Jeknal, but an unfortunate incident had left first place in a bad coma, and Gru had been offered the position of representing his species in the famed contest. The Telwakian tried its best to grasp onto the sphere, but Gru knew its oversized paws couldn't get the right grip around it. It tried its best to throw the first sphere, but it landed only a couple of meters away. Gru warbled to itself as it watched the second sphere go hurtling in the other direction. While the distance was somewhat key, accuracy was the big game here, and Jeknals excelled at that. Gru watched as the Telwak got frustrated and forfeited, allowing the contest to continue without too much of an embarrassment. Not that Gru minded. It enjoyed watching the contest. It wasn't too difficult to understand. The creatures would start by throwing the spheres at a half-meter wide target 1 meter away, and for every 5 spheres, the target would move away by 1 meter. The furthest any species had gotten was 5 meters, and that had been the previous contest by a Jeknal, who had, some would say miraculously, scored 1 sphere in the target. Once a species had missed all 5 spheres, the scores would be added up, and the amount of spheres in each distance multiplied by said distance, giving the species its throwing score. Telwakians never got past the score of 3, but to be fair, they were built for distance, not throwing. Gru knew that, and reminded himself that the best Jeknal score had been 33 the previous year. That wasn't a tough score to beat, and Gru had practiced and gotten 35 back home. But now that the contest was here, Gru was starting to get anxious. It wrapped a tentacle around itself, and thought back to how it had spiked the party juice with the neurotoxin before handing it to the first place winner back in Jeknal. Maybe it should have waited until the next contest, gotten a little more practice. "The next athlete is Gru from Jeknal," the announcer declared over the intercom, and the sound of warbling above it spurred Gru to move forward. Representatives of its spawning group had come to watch, and the last thing it wanted to do was let them down. It shuffled forward on its tentacles, grasping the rungs provided to bring it up onto the field. It turned back to the crowd and saw its brethren all waving their tentacles in a hypnotic fashion, signifying their support. Gru turned back to the pitch as the first target hovered in front of it, 1 meter away. 5 spheres flowed into the basin in front of it, and it picked one of its tentacles. The sphere wasn't too heavy, maybe 200 grams, but it still was hefty in the soft body of the Jeknalian. Gru twirled its tentacles and flung the sphere towards the target, easily getting it in. "Just relax. Imagine it is just training back home," it thought to itself, as it made the next 4 spheres in the target. A buzzer sounded, and the target hovered back 1 meter, before 5 more spheres appeared. Gru warbled to itself as the next 10 spheres went into the target, but it knew that 4 meters would be a lot harder to make. Even the last sphere at the 3 meters barely made it in. A little bit to the left, and it would have missed. Gru steadied itself as the target adjusted, and the next spheres appeared. It grasped the first one and chucked the sphere. almost not wanting to watch. It went into the target, and Gru started to feel better. It grabbed the next sphere and threw it, but watched as the sphere went wide to the left. It steadied itself and grabbed the next sphere. Miss. It's okay. Miss. Gru still had one left. Miss. Okay. Maybe. Gru should have waited another 20 cycles for the next games. That was nothing for Jeknelians, since they aged slowly. Gru started to feel nervous as the target buzzed and moved back for one more meter. If Gru missed all of these targets, it will still have the most points ever scored by a species at 34, and could go home a winner. But I didn't poison my rival for 4 meters, just one more, Gru thought to itself as it grabbed a sphere and prepared to chuck it. Miss. 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 Gru started to get angry at itself as it grabbed the last sphere. It needed to make this one, and it needed not to look like a miracle. Gru steadied himself and twirled its tentacle, imagining the ball going right into the center of the target. Finally, he let it go. Buzz! Gru couldn't believe it. The sphere had gone right into the target with absolute certainty, dead center. It warbled loudly with glee, and its fellow brethren behind it joined in a sound of victory as the target moved back 1 more meter. Gru didn't care though. It didn't even try to hit the target, letting the spheres bounce on the ground in glee as the announcer declared a new record of 39, set by Gru of the Jeknal. That's all Gru wanted to hear as it swung back to the waiting area. However, it stopped as it saw an odd creature approaching. Gru had never seen something like it before, as it walked on 2 legs towards the pitch. The creature looked at Gru with an odd look and mumbled something about space octopi before continuing towards the pitch. Gru thought about leaving, but something about the creature seemed weirdly threatening. It went back into its position on the wall where it had watched the Talwekian and waited as the creature stopped at the pitch. Next up is Howard, representing the human species from Earth, the announcer declared, and Gru remembered something about how they were a new species on the Galactic Senate. Now, Howard, do you need a refresher on the rules? Nah, Howard said, picking up one of the spheres. I played professional baseball back home. This'll be easy. It bounced the sphere in the appendage, easily gripping it, and Gru suddenly realized that it had never seen a species that was so dexterous before. All right then, whenever you are ready, the announcer said, and the target floated 1 meter in front of the human. Buzz, 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 buzz. Gru couldn't believe what he was seeing. The human had put each sphere dead center in the target so far, and hadn't shown any signs of wavering. As the target moved to the 5-meter mark, the announcer declared that the human had already blazed past Gru's record 250 points. Gru couldn't help but wonder at this point how much farther Howard could throw. Well, today has been quite a day, hasn't it, Relo?
Indeed it has, Zeidlecker. For those just tuning in, our first 2 events have been absolutely smashed by the new humans. Howard of Earth has set a brand new record of 275 points in the throwing contest, and according to him, he could have gone further had the target not maxed out its distance of 10 meters. You heard that right. He was able to hit not one, but every single throw at 10 meters with ease.
Quite right, Rello, and if you're wondering why the jumping contest hasn't started yet, that is because my fellow Malachian, Frojak, is still stuck in the distance contest, waiting for Julie of Earth to stop running. She still hasn't stopped for 12 hours. How far has she gotten at this point, Rello?
She has doubled the new record set by Gyron of Talwek, and she doesn't seem to be slowing down. In an earlier interview with us, she did say that one of her ancestors apparently ran for 500 kilometers in one go, once. We thought that she was joking before, but now I'm not so sure.
Neither am I, and I doubt anybody watching is either. We are going to sign off for now, but be sure to tune in next time to see whether these humans can keep on astounding us and setting brand new records. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barkey, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.